Lobby. Hello and welcome to Kansas City SQL Server User Group. Glad you could join us for our session with Jim Donahoe presenting Getting Started with Azure SQL Database, our favorite of the SQL Server databases. Is it your favorite, Jim?
It definitely is. Definitely is.
Jim has let me know that he likes Q&A throughout the presentation, so if my dog allows, and I don't have to mute it the entire time, I will be asking ones that pop up in the chat. Just a note, this session is recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in the next few days. And with that, I will let you take it away, Jim.
Thank you. All right, so let's do the obligatory. Can everybody see my screen? Start with that. Let me bring the slide up. Are we good? Can we see it? Thumbs up?
Good.
All right, great. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for having me to the Kansas City Virtual SQL Server User Group. Again, my name is Jim Donahoe. This session is called Getting Started with Azure SQL Database. I made this session years ago when Azure SQL Database was first launching and more and more people were adopting to it. So I thought it'd be a good start for everybody to have some interesting ways to get started with it, how to use it, how to set it up, and some quick gotchas. So a little bit about me. I'm a DBA, and what that means to me is I do about anything. I've been a DBA, I've been a network admin, I've been a cloud engineer, I've done infrastructure, I've done all kinds of cool stuff. I'm a huge video game nerd. Me and my wife both, we collect retro video games. And, you know, on the side of that, you know, it comes with nerd. I work with not so big data. And by not so big, the biggest database I've worked with was about 11 terabytes. So if you're bigger than that, that's big. That number always goes up because I always end up working with a bigger database, but I still say it's not big because these days and age, everybody's database is huge. I'm a huge Azure enthusiast. Obviously, I was working at Microsoft previously for the last 4.5 years. I am now with a company called 3Cloud. I've been there since the beginning of September. It's been great so far. If you're ever in the Pittsburgh area, you want to meet up, we have our own user group. It's at meetup.com Pittsburgh SQL. If you have any questions related to the content or just something you need to work on, or you have a question on, my email is here. My Twitter handle is there as well. If you're not on Twitter, I know a lot of folks aren't using it. There's Blue Sky. My Blue Sky username is the same as my Twitter handle. It's SQL FlipFlops DBA. But enough of that. What are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk, well, the first thing we're going to talk about is what is Azure SQL Database, right? Because everybody's like, is it just a SQL database? Is it something special? No, it's its own blend of SQL Server, and we'll talk about it, what the differences are. We're going to talk about how you set it up and install it. You're going to learn how to set up a firewall because the firewall is very important with Azure SQL Database. Auditing and threat detection. Some of these slides might be a little out of date. I tried to update them as best as I can. Auditing and threat detection is underneath what's called SQL Defender now. We'll show you that. Automatic tuning. How to configure some built-in alerts. The geo-replication setup. How to do maintenance for your Azure SQL database. And then the only thing that we're going to talk about tonight that is not related to a database is that last topic, resource logs. So with that being said, the most basic and important thing to remember about working with any cloud, Azure, AWS, Google, or even if you're in a private cloud, there is no cloud. It's just somebody else's computer, right? No matter what you're working on, it's just a computer running in a data center somewhere. There's no magic rainbows, you know, anything like that. It's just a computer, right? So if you've been working with the cloud, or if you're interested in working with the cloud, you've probably heard of several different kinds of services. You have infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service. You probably wonder, what do those mean, right? Well, before the cloud, we used to call these things monolithic setups, right? On the left side here in this packaged software. I've been around for about 20 years in the IT game, and this is very true. In the old days, most folks were responsible for everything you see on the left, right? Especially if you were a sysadmin, you were responsible for all these things, your apps, your data, all the way down to the networking, you took care of, right? Well, then along comes the cloud, or even with virtual machines, right? That's infrastructure as a service. You're going to manage your OS up to the applications. Your vendor handled the virtualization, the servers, the storage, and the networking, right? We refer to these as IaaS. This is where you're going to run a virtual machine in the cloud. If you run platform as a service, the only two things you're going to be responsible for are your applications and your data. The vendors manage everything else. And then if you use software as a service, your vendor manages everything. Some examples of software as a service would be like Office 365, those kinds of things, like where you just install it on your machine, but it's managed by the back end, right? So I'd like to ask, where do you think Azure SQL Database is going to fit in here? And my sessions are always discussion-based, folks, so please just chime in with what you think. I can't see the chat, though, but if anybody's typing in the chat, I can't see it.
Got SaaS and one coming in.
Yeah.
Ooh, it's PaaS infrastructure. So we've got one of each.
You got, and that's good. That's about usually the norm I get, right?
Yeah.
So you're all pretty much right, except Microsoft was, they didn't know what to label it as. So they came out with database as a service because it's kind of a blend, right? It's software as a service because it's SQL Server and it's managing all of that. It's also a platform because you're connecting in, but there's some infrastructure underneath there too that you're going to be taking care of. Like you're responsible for your data, right? Even though Microsoft has it, you still got to put it there and maintain it, right? So it's kind of a blend of all three. So database as a service was coined, and that's what they've been calling it. So this is the actual Wikipedia definition of what Azure SQL Database is. I won't read this to you. I know this is being recorded, so if you guys want to read this, the link's here, or you can read it later on. But we're all adults, so I don't like reading slides. But this is what Wikipedia says. Let's talk about how to configure it or how to install it, right? Most of you have probably installed SQL Server at some point in your life or some point in your career. This is the installer right here, one page. And if you look at it, it's kind of, most of the stuff should probably make sense to you if you've ever installed it before. The SQL Server name. What are you going to name your instance, right? This would be like your instance name. Notice here it has .database.windows.net. Any server you create will always have .database.windows.net at the end of it. This is the server. This is not your database at this point. Your server admin login and passwords, right? That's your SA username and password, right? Please note, you can't use the following names: SA, root, admin, administrator. Those ones are all reserved for Microsoft. So make it sure if you're going to use SQL Server Auth, you make it a strong username and password. You can also use Azure AD, which is now called Microsoft Entra. It is compatible with that. That's usually what we recommend. It's very simple to implement, and I'll show you. Your subscription, this is going to be where your instance is installed, which subscription you have. Some clients, or I'm sorry, some customers have multiple subscriptions. You'll see here in this screenshot, this was going to go into my production subscription. Your resource groups, if you're not familiar with, if you think of the way File Explorer looks when you're working with Windows, resource group is like a folder in your subscription, right? So your subscription will say is your C drive. Your resource groups are all the folders on your C drive, right? When you first start working with Azure, you might be inclined to just throw everything in the same resource group. And I'm going to tell you, please don't do that, because there's going to be a time where you need to delete some resources. And if they're all in the same resource group, you're going to have to hunt through it and check each box for each resource. And it becomes a pain. So I'm going to show you how we get around this tonight when we do our installs. The location, this is going to be where in the geographic area you want your SQL Server installed. On this slide here, I have it in Central US. Azure has over 50 some data centers, I think, worldwide that you can deploy in. So you can do it in the US, you can put it in Europe, you can put it in Asia, you know, anywhere you want. As long as there's capacity available for it, you can put it there. I talked about the firewall, right? So you're all going to walk away from here tonight as network admins, not just DBAs. Now I'll show you here in a few. If you turn this on, this is going to allow access from all Azure services in your current subscription, right? This will also allow access from the outside. But from the outside, you got to put in specific IP ranges in order to access it. So if you're working from home, right? Since the global pandemic, most IT workers have been working from home. Your home IP address would need to be in this firewall in order for you to access the database from home. Now, from years of experience, let me tell you, you probably already know what happens when you restart your modem or your router. You might lose your public IP address. It might change. To save yourself the headache, make sure that everybody that connects to your database goes through some kind of corporate VPN. Put the corporate VPN's peer IP here. One, it's going to save you that 3 o'clock in the morning phone call when somebody's trying to get in to do some work and saying, I can't get in, my IP address changed. And two, it's going to guarantee that you're going through your corporate network policies and things like that, right? So 2 birds, 1 stone. I'm going to show you how to do the firewall here when we do our install. And that's right now. So let's get the demo going, right? Do we have any questions that I can answer? No. Okay, cool. All right, so let me minimize this down a little bit. So can you folks
right now?
Okay, cool, thank you. So this is my Azure. This is my Azure portal, right? So if you haven't been to Azure before, you just go to portal.azure.com. I'm going to create a new Azure SQL server. So I'm going to choose Azure SQL. I'm going to hit create. I want to create a server right now. I don't want to do a database. I just want to do a server for right now. So I'll hit create here. So you see my subscription name is Flippity Floppity. That's fine. I want to create a new resource group. So I want to call it, let me copy this out. So again, I'm making a new folder on my hard drive for this. So we're going to call this resource group KCUG. Let's call it East West. East. There we go. My server name, we're going to put in this. Now notice I'm not putting the database.net, windows.net. This will automatically get added no matter what. My location, I'm going to keep it in East US because, you know, I live in just outside of Pittsburgh, so that's where I want it. I'm going to use SQL auth only because I don't have Azure AD or Entra, Microsoft Entra right now. So I'm going to make my username. This is my SA user, and then I'm going to get my password. And even though this is being recorded, it's okay because once my demo is done, I'm going to delete this, so nobody's going to be able to hack my stuff anyway. Just in case anybody's watching. And I'm going to hit review and create, right? And Microsoft's nice enough to tell me right now there's no additional charges right now because all I'm doing really is making what's called a TDS endpoint, right? Just making a DNS entry in Microsoft's DNS server to say, hey, when I point to this server, I want you to go to these databases, right? But that was it. That was the install, right? So right now it's going in, it's installed, it's creating my instance of my server in Azure in East US, right? That was it. So we're going to let that go for now. We're going to come back to the firewall part once this is done, because This could take 10 minutes. This can take a minute. It depends on how busy Azure is, but we'll come back to the firewall piece here soon. So, the next thing we're going to talk about is auditing and threat detection. Now, again, I think this feature did change. It's called like Cloud, like Defender for Cloud or Defender for SQL, and I'll show that to you as well. But it's the same feature set, right? So inside of this, there's going to be several different options you can choose, right? And right now, this is telling it was $15 a month per server back then. It's probably changed. Don't quote me on the pricing. This protected you from all sorts of different attacks. We're talking about DDoS, SQL injections, all kinds of things, and it works very well. Before coming to Microsoft and before I was working in a healthcare client, I got a free trip to Ignite because I had a good customer story, a good story about the way this worked. I was working in a healthcare space, and we were in the US, but we had a footprint in the UK. If you're familiar with the way patient laws work in the UK, patient data was not allowed to leave the shores of the UK, physically or electronically. So we set up all of our networks and things so that wouldn't happen. Well, one day I started getting threat detection alerts saying that there was access coming from the United States. I'm like, well, we can't do this. Let's shut it down, right? And it gives me the option, block this attacker. About an hour later, our SCOM, our monitoring admin, comes downstairs and he's like, hey, I can't access this server from SCOM. What's going on? And it took a few minutes of us talking back and forth, and I realized I blocked him. So it took 30 seconds to block him, but it took about a week and a half to get everything unblocked because we had to submit paperwork to Microsoft. We had to wait for them to get all those IP addresses out of all their networking equipment. And then they asked us to come to Ignite to speak about our experience. So I got a free trip to Ignite out of it. But it works very well. It's very intuitive. It gives you really great feedback on your databases. So I always highly recommend it. It's a little extra a month, but for the protection you get, it's very well worth it, especially in this day and age. You always hear about somebody getting hacked, somebody leaking data, something happening. You don't want to be that because you're being a little cheap with the money. It's like I said, I think it's $15 an extra a month. It's not much. Automatic tuning. I'm sure some of you have heard about automatic tuning inside of SQL Server or even in Oracle. The Oracle CEO was on record years ago talking about, by the year 2022, DBAs would be extinct because databases would be able to tune themselves. Well, we're still here, right? Databases aren't that smart yet. One of the things automatic tuning we have is automatic index management, right? So I like to give this presentation in person because I can see hands, but how many of you have ever manually added an index to see if it speeds up your operations, right? I do it all the time, right? How much time would you spend doing that on a weekly basis? Well, before I came to 3Cloud and before I went to Microsoft, I was working for another consulting group. I used to spend at least 30 to 40 hours a week working with clients on performance. And I could tell you, this was a good bit of it, was looking at indexes. And how much time you spend doing that weekly, again, depends on what your workload is. The way automatic index management works, I always tell you, trust it, but verify it, right? We're going to talk about the actual algorithm it uses. I don't recommend enabling it in prod. And there's reasons why, and we'll talk about them. I always tell folks, even when I was at Microsoft, I would say, enable on a test set of data first. Let it work on test, see what it does, see how it works. If you like what it's doing, take what it's recommending on test and apply it to prod. Just don't turn it on in prod. This is the way it actually works. So you'll turn on automatic tuning for index management. It'll learn the way you are using your database, right? This is that AI. It's sitting there looking at, okay, well, you're doing this query this many times a day. It then adapts the indexes to your queries. It'll say, you know what? I think this index will help you out. Let me make it. It'll make the index. And then it does its verification. It has a testing period that it lets it, I call it lets it soak. If it does not get the performance benefit that it thought it was going to get, it will automatically drop that index by itself. It does this automatically. It's such a cool feature. The only downside to it is when it creates an index, remember, it's a machine. It gives it a really funky name. It gives it like a table name, a column name, and then a long GUID, right? And if you're one of those people that has to check in their code, I seriously doubt anybody wants you checking in code with names like that. I know I wouldn't as a DBA. I would not want to be having indexes named table underscore index underscore 16-digit GUID, right? If you want to, that's fine. That's just me. That's why I say put it in test, see what it does. If you like it, put it in prod, but just change the name.
Does that index drop have, is that for just any index or just the one that you just created and did a test on?
That's a great question. It can actually drop some of your indexes as well. So the way the drop index works is if your index is not used for, I think it was 91 days, it will recommend dropping it, right? So let's say you do reports every quarter, right? And it only does it, you only use that index one time for that quarter. And then 91 day or 93 days later, you go to run your report and the index is gone because Azure DB dropped it. It'll put it back on there. It's gonna say, oh, you know what? I think you need it again. And it'll put it back on it. And then the cycle repeats, right? So that's the way drop works. It only looks at how long it's been since the index has been used. Or if it's a duplicate, it'll drop duplicate indexes as well. It also has the ability to force the last good plan. A lot of this, if you're familiar with Query Store is driving a good bit of this. So if you're familiar with Query Store, these options probably look familiar to you because these are coming from Query Store itself. Force plan and parameterization are part of the automatic tuning options with Azure DB. Alerts. Many of you probably have some kind of third-party system that you're doing for alerts. Many of you maybe have homebrewed your own alerting. Well, Azure DB has some of its own alerting capabilities. It's an extra fee, but they are there, right? It's a little bit confusing on how to set it up, and I'll go through all this when we get to our demos. But the gist of it is, the resource for this is my database. It was a Nintendo database, right? There's no conditions added yet because we're going to show those. The action group will show what happens when that condition is met. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So it's either going to email, it's going to do a web hook, it's going to send you a text. And then in the alert details, you put the name and you put a description in there of what's going on, right? Make it as explicit as possible because these are alerts coming out to you. You don't want to just say database alert, right? Because that's not going to make any sense. Let's show a quick. So, okay, our deployment was complete. So I'm going to go to my server. So I'm just going to click on go to resource here. This is my server, right? We're actually going to connect to. I'm going to copy this in. Actually, first, sorry, we can't connect in because I didn't put my IP address in. So to put our IP address in, we go to networking. Once we're at networking, you see here, this is that toggle switch. It's not a toggle switch anymore. It's these radio buttons. But right now, everything is disabled coming in. Nothing can access this database. I'll prove it to you. So I created it. I have the username and password to it, right? So I'm going to put that in. I'm going to put my username and password in. And there you go. I don't know if you can see it, but it tells me my connection was denied since deny public network access is set to yes. Right. So in other words, you can't get in because public access is off. Right. So let me go in. If I hit selected networks, I hit save here first. All right. And there's virtual network rules. I don't talk about those in this because I'm more about getting my IP address in. So if you're working on your machine at home and you just want to get your IP address in there fast, you can use this, add your client IPv4 address in. I like to give it a better name. So Jim, right? And then I'll hit save. So now if I try this again, now it works, right? But there's no databases, right? Nothing here. There's a master database and that's it. Right. If you notice, you don't even see like tempdb or anything like that. Tempdb is there. You can still use tempdb. You just don't have access to view it through Manager Studio or anything. You can also use Azure Data Studio. I hope some of you have used this before. I like Azure Data Studio more than I like Manager Studio now, mainly because it's very lightweight. I can have notebooks, all kinds of cool stuff with it. There's a lot of cool plugins with Azure Data Studio. You can build dashboards so that when you connect in, it automatically shows you database sizes and stuff. But I don't have anything set up because this is a new laptop. I didn't get any of my extension installed. But that's the firewall. We have any questions related to the networking side? We all good there?
Questions in the chat.
Okay, great. So the next thing we were going to talk about, like when I was going through the slides, is Defender, right? So here's that Defender for cloud. This is what that auditing and threat protection is, right? So let me scroll out of here a little bit. I don't want to install agents, so remind me later. Oh, it should be back. Right. This doesn't want to play nice. There we go. So we can see Microsoft Defender for SQL. If I want to enable it, it's probably going to like say there's a fee for it, right? So 30 days free charge, and then it still is. It's $15 a month, right? So, and then the last thing I was going to talk about the alerts. We can't do alerts right now because I don't have any databases yet. So let's make a quick database. Before we do that, though, what's my next slide? The next slide, okay. So we did a normal install, right? We went through the UI and did the install. A lot of things are done programmatically now. You might have heard of like DevOps or like Terraform or things like that to create stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a secondary server and I'm going to use PowerShell to do it, right? So this is my PowerShell script. I sent all this stuff to Christina. She's going to have it for the slides and my script for you guys to use. It's not going to have any of this info in here. It'll be blank. It'll show you what to put in, but it's not going to have any of my stuff in there. But you can see from my installer, right? My resource group name, I'm making a new resource group. It's going to be resource group KCSSUG US failover, right? I'm sorry, user group Central US failover. The location is going to be in the Central US. It's going to have the same login info as my primary server. The server name is going to be KCSSUG flip secondary. It's going to put my IP address into the firewall. Right? These are all just the variables here. Oops. This is why you shouldn't mess around with stuff when you're doing a demo. Down here is where it's actually going to start creating things, right? So it's going to create my resource group first because this has to be in place first in order to create the server. It's then going to create my server. Once the server's done, it'll make my firewall. It'll put my IP address range, and it'll be done. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm just using what's called the Azure CLI right through the portal, right? The Cloud Shell. To get this, you just click on this button up here. If it's your first time doing it, it'll tell you have to set up a storage account. It's fine. It just has to have a storage account for it to work. The options are PowerShell or Bash. I'm doing PowerShell. If you can do it in Bash, but I'm more familiar with PowerShell. So I'm just going to paste it in. So first things first. Oh, made something mad. Okay. What did I do? Oh, I bet you I missed one of those ticks or something. Let's try this again. Live troubleshooting. Why not? Traditional parent cannot be found that accepts ordering system management PowerShell. So it has a problem with let's do this. I should have a clean one here. Just copy this in. All right, let's not do that. Copy that. One more time. No. All right. That's weird. Let me come back to this part because this should be working and it's not. Great.
Live demo, so of course it's not going to.
I know. That's the way it always works, right? Like I said, it has to be something that I wonder if I have like a space at the end is not happy with. And
Extra parentheses at the end.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
There's one open, two open, and two closed. So I don't think. All right. When worst comes the worst, let's do this. Let's reopen the shell. Name to location. Ah, that's what it is. Ah.
Nice.
Yeah, small space. That's all it was. I hope. We'll find out. Let me go over to the other one. Let me go to the one that has all my data. Try this again. Oh, yes, we'll just do updating. All right, now it's working.
Oh.
Live troubleshooting. It was an extra feature for you folks tonight. So there's my first one. This is going to be the failover. So right now there's probably nothing in here. When this line disappears, we should see my second server show up, right? We're going to give it some time while it runs though. And we're going to talk about some other features here while this is going on. So with that being said, we're going to have geo-replication, all right? So geo-replication, I like to think of as Windows clustering, but with the easy button, right? Many of you have probably set up a Windows cluster in your career. If you haven't, you're very lucky. If you have, then you know how much fun it is. When I used to work as a consultant prior to Microsoft, when somebody would say, hey, we want a new Windows failover cluster for SQL Server, I would right out of the gate tell them that's a 40-hour engagement, right? And people would look at me like my head was on fire. I'm like, well, here's the deal. I need to talk to your Windows admin, your storage admin, your network admin, your Active Directory admin, right? Trying to organize all those people on the one phone call was like herding cats, right? because you might get 3 out of the 5 because the other 2 have, like, one has an emergency, one's on PTO, and then you reschedule, but then another person can't make it. That's what the 40 hours were for, because by the time you got everybody aligned and ready to do anything, it was like 25 hours into the project, right? Well, with georeplication, it's so much easier, right? This is what it looks like once it's set up. But what if I told you that I can configure Azure SQL Database, or, like I said, or DBaaS, Database as a Service, to be highly available in seconds? What if I told you I could build my Windows cluster in seconds? And I could set up disaster recovery in seconds. And then the best part is, what if I told you I can do it all through point and click, like a good 80s child, right? We demanded a GUI, we got it. I want to do everything point and click, right? I want to do this all through the GUI. To set this up, we're going to need to create a database first, right? So this is just a flow chart. We're going to do a live demo here soon. But with my Nintendo database, right, you go to the database itself, you click on georeplication, you'll see that it doesn't have anything configured as a secondary. I then create one. I point it to where I want it to go. That's why we're making that second server. Once we hit the second server and hit OK, it starts seeding my data. It's taking the last good backup, restoring it over there onto the new server, doing like it does if you're setting up an always on group. It's seeding the data, it's shipping transactions. Once it's done, that database is available to fail over to, right? Now, this can take some time depending on a few things. One, the size of your database. If you have a large database, and by large, I mean 100 gig or more, it takes some time because it has to move that backup file from one geographic location to the next. It then has to ship any in-flight transactions that were done after that backup, right? So it takes some time. For us tonight, it shouldn't take too long because we're just going to make a simple database and there's not going to be any traffic going to it, right? The next part of that is a failover group. Before failover groups, when you would set up georeplication, it was great. The only problem was, if you're familiar with Windows clustering, when you set up your old Windows cluster with a listener, you pointed all your connection strings to the listener, and then it didn't matter where you failed over to, right? Well, with Azure DB, prior to failover groups, if you failed over from A to B, you'd have to go in and update all of your connection strings to point at the new server. Microsoft recognized this and created what's called a failover group. A failover group is pretty much just your listener name, right? It's really the only function it serves. It gives you a read-write listener endpoint that we see here. This will stay static no matter where you're running your database. And then you have read-only, right? That's the biggest functionality of it. We'll talk about the other parts when we set it up, like the failover policy and the grace period. I'll explain all those when we set this up. So it's time for the demo. Let's make sure our other server was made. It should be there. So let me refresh my resource group and we see it. So here's my secondary. Let's make sure that my IP address is in there. It is. We're good, right? All right. So this is my secondary. Let me go back to my primary, which was under East US. Go into my server, and I'm just going to hit create database. Right. This is something new. This was announced last week. We're not going to do this, but if you're new to Azure DB and you want to mess around with it for free, you can do this. One of the things with it, though, that I tried out before tonight was I wanted to see if I can set it up as a geo-replicated pair. You cannot do it. So if you're doing this, it can only be on one server. You can't do geo-replication with it. So there might be other features that don't work with it. But if you just want something that you can create and just tinker around with, I would try that out. It's free every month. You get so much credits for it towards a month. So let's call this.
We
Yep.
do have a
Good.
quick question from Eric Lightman.
Okay.
He asked, do you set up rules and times for maintenance? For example, reindex retention for both geodatabases?
That's a great question, and we're going to talk about that. I have a maintenance section, and we'll talk about that. But they always say the great questions are the ones that are answered later. So if I don't answer it, Eric, to your satisfaction, let me know. But we're going to cover that in a bit. So we're just going to call this AdventureWorks because everybody loved AdventureWorks, right? I'm going to configure my database. I don't want it to be serverless. I want it to be the old model. I want to make it a standard database. Hit apply here, right? One of the things I want to change though is, again, if you're new to Azure DB and you want like a familiar data set, if you go to additional settings here, you can choose a sample, right? And for this, modify basic, okay. If you choose this, it'll show you that it's going to make AdventureWorks LT, right? So the schema and the data it's going to use is going to be similar to AdventureWorks LT, if you're familiar with those at all. Those were the databases we used to use before worldwide or wide world importers, right? So I'm just going to hit review and create here. Again, it's going to show me it's going to cost me about $15 a month for this database. That's okay. I'm going to hit create. Shouldn't take too long. Any other questions yet? Yep, looks like we're okay. All right. So I sent Christina this script, but I'm wondering if I sent it with that error in it. So Christina, I'll probably send you another copy of the script tonight once the session is over, because I'd hate for you guys to have a bad script from me.
That's fine. That's fine. No worries.
So while that's creating, let's talk about the next feature, and we'll come back to the to make that stuff. Another feature of Azure DB is we have these things called elastic pools, right? This is what Microsoft defines an elastic pool to be. It's a cost-effective solution for managing multiple databases, right? If you need more info about that definition, you can find it there. Here's what I think about elastic pools. If you have multiple databases that have a predictable usage, instead of paying for each database, you can create what's called an elastic pool and probably save some money, right? You can put all the databases into what's called an elastic pool. So instead of paying an individual price, you'll save money. Here's a way I used to do it back in my healthcare days, right? Back in those days, everything, if you wanted all the cool features, you had to be on premium, right? In our production environment, we had 52 databases. Each database had to be at P2 or higher, right? So you can see that there was single database premium P2, 250 DTUs. It was billed at $1.25 an hour, right? So 52 databases times 744 hours, which is how many hours are in a month. It's 48 grand, right? That was just for the database. That was just for the compute part. Then we had to get the storage. It was 1 terabyte times 52 databases times 744 hours. It was about 4,600, right? So just under $53,000 a month in a month for just these databases, right? They didn't use all these DTUs. It was just, we wanted this performance level because we wanted access to column store indexing, and there was a few other things, right? We had to be at that level or higher to have access to it. Well, then elastic pools came out. I was able to put all the databases into one elastic pool, right? So 4,000 DTUs. I had 4 terabytes of storage. I could put 100 databases in there. It was billed at $30 an hour. But look at the total. Look at the total for the month. It was about 30 grand cheaper, right? Yay, Jim, you saved us 30 grand a month. Here's a nice big bonus. Yeah, didn't happen, but it was a nice thought, right? But that's what elastic pools can give you. Again, predictable usage patterns. You don't want databases in an elastic pool if they all peak at the same time, because then it's kind of like what happens on-prem where a database gets resource starved, right? So you got to understand your patterns. If you need help with that, there are other people out there, they talk about like how to migrate, and there's tools out there you can leverage to, monitor and to use for your databases to see which tier you should do. It's not something we're going to talk about tonight, but there's stuff out there for you to look at. So maintenance, right? One of the maintenance tasks that was brought up was about indexing, right? Well, first of all, the biggest thing about your maintenance, your backups. Backups you're not responsible for. Microsoft takes care of it. They do a weekly full, hourly differential, and transaction logs every 5 to 15 minutes, depending on your service tier and the usage of your database, right? But you'll at least have transaction logs every 15 minutes. Integrity checks, you can run these on your own, but Microsoft really doesn't want you to, because you're going to take away resources from your database while you do this. Microsoft does this on the back end without you seeing any impact to your database. Even when your backups are being taken, you're not seeing any impact. Your indexes and your stats, you're still responsible for, because Microsoft doesn't know if you want rebuilds, reorgs, how often you want your stats updated, how often you want your fill factor, or, what you want your stats updated at. So it's still done by you. There was a good blog post out there about how people do these. The most common way back then was called automation runbooks. Runbooks was a separate Microsoft service, Azure service. It was really cool the way it worked. It was PowerShell driven. Do not use the pointy, clicky ones, because by the time you're done, it'll look like a spirograph with a nightmare. Do not do it that way. There's plenty of blog posts out there for using runbooks and how to set them up. If you're familiar with Ola Hallengren, his solution works against Azure DB. I've used it before. Another new thing that's come out is the Elastic Job Agent. Here's the thing with that. Microsoft will say it's free. It's not free. The service itself is free, but you have to create the control database, right? And here's what we're talking about. You have to pay for that database that stores all the service-related info. It has to be an S1 level or higher. It's usually about $15 to $30 a month just to store that database alone. Now, that one database can control all the jobs for the entire server. So if you have 100 databases on that server, an extra $30 a month might not be a bad idea to do that, right? It's very tricky to set up. There's a lot of good info here on how to set it up. The security behind it is what I find to be the trickiest part. It's about how you got to create your usernames. You have to with Azure DB. Once you grasp the concept, though, it works great. And again, Ola Hallengren scripts can be used there as well. If you're not familiar with Ola Hallengren, he has a very lightweight maintenance solution that's absolutely free, and companies across the spectrum use it, from Fortune 500 to Fortune 50 clients use it. It's very good. All right, so let's see if our database is done. It is. Okay. So here's our AdventureWorks database. So let me go onto my primary server. If I refresh databases, I should see AdventureWorks, right? There is some stuff here. Come on. Let's just do a quick query, right? Let's just do select top 10 stuff. Sales customer. Right. So we know we have some data in there. It's not a big database. It's AdventureWorks LT. But let's set this up to go from my primary server to my secondary. So over here on the left, It's not called geo-replication anymore. It's just called replicas. You'll just click on replica here. We'll hit create replica. Some of the basic info we got to fill out. The server name, it should automatically see which ones we have. I want to choose my failover region, so flip secondary. I don't want to use an elastic pool because I don't need one right now. It automatically chooses what my database is currently set to. You can set this higher if you want. For doing this right now, for this small of a database, I leave it the way it is because it's not that bad. If you need to do TDE, you can set it up here. I let Microsoft handle my TDE. I leave the backup storage the same. And I'll hit review and create. This is the important part. So since I'm now creating a replica of my database, I'm technically creating a second database in a different data center. So now my cost has doubled, right? So I'm paying for 2 copies of the database. So it's another $15 a month to have this database over there. So I'll hit create here. And if I go to the database itself, we should be able to see it starting its process, right? So you can see it says it's seeding, right? So we'll let that go for a minute, and then we'll come back and do our failover group and our alerts. But some cool bonus features with Azure DB, and this is out of the box. This is no extra charge. TDE, it's enabled by default at no extra cost to you. I highly recommend leaving TDE on if you're going to use Azure DB. The big reason is because it's not on your hardware. It's on Microsoft's disk drives. You don't know when they throw those disk drives out, how they destroy them. I know they publish it when they do it or how they do it, but it's my data. I want to make sure it's safe. So I would leave TDE enabled. If you need to have your own encryption key, it does support that. You have to use you have to use a service called the Azure Key Vault, and you have to rotate the keys yourself. What's cool is if you let Microsoft handle the TDE, we saw how we just did the geo replication. Microsoft handles the key management between both replicas, so you don't have to. Query Store, it's enabled by default for all of your databases, right? Doesn't matter if you're on basic, standard, premium, hyperscale, vCore, serverless, doesn't matter. It's there and it's on, right? Query Store is a very powerful feature for SQL Server. If you haven't started using it, I would highly recommend taking a look at it and reading up about it. It gives a lot of insights into how your databases and your instance is running. Dynamic data masking is another cool feature I like to mess with. It's available for free across all the database tiers as well. If you're in healthcare, finance, if you need to mask data, it's really cool the way it works. The longer your database is used and sitting there, if you go to dynamic data masking, it actually learns your data. It's like, hey, you know what? You have a column named SSN. I recommend using this mask. Or you have a field called credit card or CC or whatever. It'll make, you know what? Maybe you should use a credit card mask. It's really neat the way it works, and it's free. And then again, this is that free database to use every month. I put a link to it here. If you just click on the link, it'll take you to the announcement page and how to set that up if you need to. Let's see where we're at with this. Should be done. Okay. So I now have a readable secondary in central US, right? I can connect to this. This is if I wanted to connect to it and point my Power BI to it, I could be able to run my reports off of it. I can't insert data to it, but I can read from it. But the thing I need to do next is I got to create my failover group, right? Because if I would fail over to my secondary, I'd have to repoint all my connection strings to that secondary server. And I don't want to have to do that. That's a pain. So let me go to primary. And we're going to go to failover groups here. I'll hit add group. For my failover name, let's call it FGKCUG flips. right? The server, we're going to choose the secondary server to go to. So right now I'm on primary. I want to go to secondary. Read write failover policy. If you want to fail it over if you want to let it automatically do it, you leave it at automatic. If you want to control the failover, you want to set it to manual. If you leave it on automatic, you have this grace period, right? This grace period, what this will do is it will wait for 1 hour before it does what's called a forced failover. It's going to wait to make sure that it can fail you over to the secondary without the chance of data loss. If after an hour, it's like, I can't do it, it's going to have to fail it over, you're going to do a forced failover, and there might be a chance of some data loss, right? That's what the grace period is. You can't go lower than an hour, right? My thing is I wish you could, because I've been a DBA for a long time. And if I would tell people like, hey, you know what, there's a problem, just wait an hour and let Microsoft fail it over, they're going to be like, we don't have an hour, fail it over now, right? Because nobody wants to wait an hour. The next thing I want to do is click on my database. So it's going to show me that Adventure works. So I'll check the box. You can see there's no extra charge for it. Hit select. Now hit create. So once this is done, we'll have our failover group, and I'll show you how you can connect to your failover group instead of the server names directly. Any questions right now?
Yeah, Prashant has a question. We're asking if for Azure Managed Instance versus Elastic Pool to store databases, which one is better?
Well, managed instance is a complete different service than what Azure DB is. Managed instance is nice. It's a little bit more pricier than Azure DB, but it's up to you, really. Most people like managed instance when they're migrating because it gives them the same feel as SQL Server, as a traditional SQL Server, compared to how it works with Azure DB. I hope I'm answering your question, but it's a separate service. So here's our failover group. So we can see the lines there solid. So if I take my endpoint here, I will disconnect from this just so you can see that I'm not fibbing. And I will connect to the listener name. So it's the failover group KC user group flips.database.windows.net. It's going to be the same username and password because it's still connecting to the master database. And I'll put the password in. I'll hit connect. And there I am, right? Now let's see which side I'm on. So if I do select that server name, I can see that I'm at my primary instance, right? Well, let me fail this over real quick. I'm going to do a force failover because why the heck not? I'm not worried about data loss in AdventureWorks LT. It shouldn't take that long. Again, this is one of those operations that can take longer. The bigger your database, the longer it could take. But I don't know if you saw it happen real fast, but it just switched it. So Central US is now my primary. East US is now my secondary. So if I run my script again, there we go. It changed it from primary to secondary, right? So as you saw, we created the cluster, the failover group name, point and click. We had to type in a few things, but it was very simple compared to the traditional way of setting up a Windows failover cluster, right? If anybody on the meeting has built a Windows failover cluster before, I'm sure you agree with me about how much easier that was compared to the other one. And you didn't even have to worry about the DNS part. Like, we took care of the DNS. So the last thing we're going to talk about tonight are things called resource locks. And this is the only feature we're going to talk about tonight that's not related to SQL Server. This is an Azure related thing, but it can save your butt. So I like to give real world scenarios that I've encountered when I talk about these things. So the first time I've heard about these, my wife and I were on vacation. We were down in Washington, D.C. I was walking up the stairs to the Lincoln Memorial, and I start getting phone calls from my boss. And I'm like, I'm on vacation. So I hit ignore, right? He called back. I hit ignore. He called a third time. I'm like, dude, I'm on vacation. He goes, we got a problem. I was like, okay. He's like, the East US server is gone. I was like, what do you mean gone? He's like, I can't find it in Azure. Like, it's gone. I was like, well, is the secondary up? He's like, yeah. I was like, so just use that one. And I hung out. I was like, I'll see you in 4 days. Right. So I came back to the office 4 days later. And, the first thing everybody's like is, what the hell happened? Where did our server go? I'm like, all right, well, let's check logs. Go into logs. And I found out the marketing manager, the marketing VP, deleted the server. I was like, why would he do? Like, one, why did he do that? And two, why does he have permissions to do that? So, as calm as I could take myself, I went to his office and asked, why did you do this? He was taking screenshots to put in for a newsletter, and the name wasn't flashy enough. He didn't like the naming convention we had. So he deleted it. And as calmly as I could, I told him, I need you to stay in your lane, and you're not supposed to do that. And after today, you're not going to do that anymore. So I went back upstairs and we did a huge security audit and removed everybody's permissions. But then I learned about resource locks. Resource locks are really cool. There's two types, right? There's a delete, which means authorized users can still read and modify a resource. You'll never be able to delete it. And then there's read only. Read only is bad for Azure SQL DB. It's hilarious for pranks. It's not good for production. Don't ever do this in production, because don't tell anybody I told you to do this, because I will deny it. Do not do this in production. I used to have 10 to 15 developers working on my team, and a lot of them were remote, and I had to make sure they were doing their work. So every now and then on their development instance, I would put a read-only resource lock on their database, right? And I'd wait for them to come back and say, hey, my database is in read-only. Do you know what's going on? Like, oh yeah, I did this. Most of the time it was good. I had one guy go 6 days before telling me. That's a resume submission opportunity, right? I did not let him stay. But again, fun for pranks, bad for database as a service. If you put a delete resource lock on your production resource groups, it doesn't matter who tries to delete it, they'll get an error, right? Even if you have your subscription admin, you still cannot delete any resource underneath that resource group. This prevents so many things from happening accidentally. If you need to delete something that has a resource lock on it, you have to delete the resource lock, then delete the resource, then put the resource lock back on. It's meant to be that cumbersome because it's there to protect you. But again, I recommend these to everybody because of situations like I went through, where people that that should not have had the permissions to do things had them, and chaos ensued. So some resources, right? Some of these are a little outdated, but your local past chapter, like Christina here has, or your local Kansas City user group. These are great if you want to, learn more about topics. You don't just have to stick with yours either. A lot of folks a lot of chapters are still doing virtual only meetings. Look around. You can find really good topics by a lot of great speakers. Twitter and Blue Sky, those are the big things right now for the SQL family and for the SQL help. Reaching out to any of those hashtags, get your response pretty quick. The vulnerability scan, that's part of that SQL Defender It'll review your database weekly and send you a nice little email report to show you if you have any discrepancies or any security gaps. Alan Hurt is one of my heroes that I love with SQL Server and with Windows. He is a huge, huge resource for clustering and HA. If you have any questions or anything that you're looking at anything, look at his website in regards to clustering or high availability. He probably has a blog on it or something. I guarantee it. SentryOne. If you're using Plan Explorer to review execution plans, it's completely free. Virtual past chapters are dead. Don't worry about those anymore. Learn.microsoft.com. That is the new training academy. Everything there is free for you to review. Even if you're looking at taking a Microsoft certification, you can now take practice tests through the learn.microsoft.com page. Again, totally free. It's very good resources. It's written by Microsoft individuals, so take a look at that. With that being said, do we have any final questions, folks?
I'm typing, so we'll give them a minute.
Okay.
Really loved your point about that corporate VPN helping that firewall configuration, because you're so right about being that critical moment you find out at 3 a.m. that you can't get in.
A lot of the stuff I recommend is from personal experience. So,
Prashant has a question. Is there any way we can restore back if we've deleted resources?
Yes, actually you can. It depends on how long ago it was. It depends on your service tier, right? So the more money you pay Microsoft, the more time you get to restore. I want to say the least amount of time is 7 days, right? So if I would delete that AdventureWorks database I have, I believe I can wait up to 7 days to restore it from deletion. But again, it's gonna depend on the service tier you're on, and again, it's gonna depend on how much money you're spending. If you Google that question, Prashant, I'm sure you could probably get the accurate timelines from one of the Microsoft docs. But yeah, the short answer is yes, you can. It just depends on how far back you're looking to restore. If it's just like an accidental oopsie, oops, I deleted this 10 minutes ago, yeah, you can restore it back.
Awesome. Well, looks like that was the last question. She said, got it, thanks. And that's all the ones that I have. Any additional last minute thoughts?
For me, but I had to make sure I added Taylor Swift into my my presentation for you Kansas City folks, because I hear she's a huge celebrity for you guys right now.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for taking your time today. Really, really appreciate it. We're lucky to have you, and thanks so much for sharing with us.
It was my absolute pleasure. Do you have any way you could show us to customize the dashboard? Yeah, sure. So I can show you that real quick. Let me go back to home. So you can see this is just a blank dashboard I have here. I just went to here in the dashboard. All right, you talking about this dashboard, or are you talking about in the Data Studio?
You can come off mute if you prefer. Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm talking about, because I saw one place like all my resource group, all my subscription in a nice way, so if I go on my open, right, portal.azure.com, and I can click just, like if there is a Databricks thing, there is a Synapse, I can open, like one way, but we have like a multiple resource group subscription and all those things. So I want to see like how I can customize easily, that's fun.
Sure. So it's been a while since I made a custom one, but it looks like they added some cool stuff. So if you just hit create here, you can create a custom one. There's one here that says SQL Database Health. So I might just click on this one. And we'll just call it Flip SQL. It's probably going to ask me which resource I wanted to look at. So let's look at AdventureWorks. I'll hit submit. And there you go, right off the bat, this is just the one database, right? It looked like there was an option to create an actual custom one. So here's the resource group one here. I guess you usually just click and drag it over, and then you can resize it. So this lists all your resource groups. You have, if you want to put a clock in, is this what you were looking for, Prashant?
Yeah, I was looking, I tried that way, but we have like a multiple things, so I couldn't find in that right side to add.
Oh, yeah. So resize, move red house to your dashboard. Like, so this is where it starts getting funky. Like, let's see what else I want to put on here. Let's look at a metrics chart. So if you do metrics, and then configure tile. So past 24 hours, okay. But what metrics is it looking at is what my thing is. Let's do 2x4 because it's a pretty big. It's just one of those things that you got to like click around in and mess around with, like depending on what you're looking for yourself. So if I hit save, no.
Yeah, actually, like not from the right side, because right side does not have all the options. Like, let's say we have different data bricks, right? We have different areas, Azure Data Factory. We have different resource group, we have some subscription. So all those I want to go in a one page, is it same thing? Like I want to drag and drop, but I couldn't find from the right side. So
I see.
If I gonna create, and manually I have to add each one, like my development one, my QA one, my production one.
I see.
It's cumbersome when I have to do for all those things.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like if I do all resources, it's going to show everything in the subscription, which that would be a lot, right? So
Yeah,
I wouldn't want that. I'm sure there's ways to do it. Personally, I'm not sure how to do it, but if you open up
play around with it,
it might be one of those things like you can open up a ticket and just have somebody walk you through it.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I know that's probably the best thing I can recommend for you, because
no, that's fine. I really appreciate, at least you show me something, that also helpful for me, because when you mention, like you work for like a cloud for many years, so I thought might be you make it easy your life, right?
Yeah. I used to have a really cool one back in the day, but then I kind of, when I became a consultant and I started working with so many different clients, I kind of just let it go because I was connecting to so many different Azure subscriptions that and under different usernames that I just stopped building them. But one of the cool ones that I like to use was there's an extension inside of Azure Data Studio for Azure SQL for Azure SQL Database, and you can build like a little dashboard off of it. I just gotta remember the name of it.
Oh, cool.
There used to be, and because I have everybody watching me, I won't be able to find the extension name, right? But
Microsoft never changes its names, right?
No, not at all. The admin pack was good. I remember that one.
Yeah, those extension are some of the extension very good,
Yeah, the migration one surprisingly works very well. I've had folks use it, and I've used it for clients prior to coming to 3Cloud. It worked really well.
Is it same thing like is a DMA? Because I didn't use it. I'm using DMA a lot.
VM. I mean, it's kind of like
DMA,
using
like
the migrate.
Yeah,
it kind of does the Azure migration service. If you're familiar with that, it's kind of like that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
It just does everything. It does all that for you through the extension itself.
Also does what the map tool used to do. I guess it still does. But yeah. So a lot of cool information from there, all in one spot.
Only the things, like a data migration assistant for on-prem I'm using. Only the caveat is, like if databases exist and I want to restore back, I cannot overwrite, I have to delete it and then I can migrate.
Yeah.
But DMA is very cool, like handy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my previous question, if you have time, like, because I was asking, like, we have a lot of like a on-prem SQL Server and we are trying to migrate, but we are trying to figure it out, like, what will be the best, like, we can do as a, like, um, Azure manage instance, or like you mentioned, like the Elastic pool, right? We can bundle it up, all those database under the Elastic pool, or we should use like as a managed instance and add all those database there.
Right. So there's tools out there, Prashant, that you can leverage to try to find out which would work better for you. One of them is like the migration assistant, right? Isn't that what it's called? Oh man, data migration assistant. Yeah, the data migration assistant, that the DMA tool, right? If you that's the tool that Microsoft uses to assess you, right? There's nothing fancy.
Normally on-prem I'm using for my assessment, so it's gonna tell me like any feature compatibility or anything, gonna like a breaking changes or anything gonna affect. So I do that one. Yeah, I'm using that one. Yeah, but only the question, like we have a lot of databases, so should we use a manage instance and underneath we can put it all this database, or like we use Elastic pool, like for cost purpose or other? Which one is better? That's how I was trying to find it out.
Right. So again, it's going to depend on like your database patterns, right? Because you really don't want in an Elastic pool, you don't want more than one or two data. Let's say you put 50 databases in it, right? You don't want more than like, let's say 20% of your databases all peaking at the same time, because they're all sharing the amount of compute resources that are inside of that pool. So if one database peaks and the other databases need compute resources, they're kind of resource starved, right? So with a managed instance, it works more like how your traditional SQL Server would work, right? So if you're looking for a better lift and shift kind of migration, odds are you would probably want to choose managed instance itself.
Yeah, right? That's, I think, works better, right? We were thinking about, but you mentioned that Elastic pool, so I thought let's get your expertise in there, to gain some your experience there. Yeah, so that's cool, so we can use managed instance there.
Yeah.
We have a couple more questions that came in.
Yeah, I see them. So Mokhtar, that's everything you did here can be done. Yeah. So the only thing on that free subscription that won't work with that free database that I've tested so far was you couldn't do geo-replication with it. So that was one of the only things that I couldn't get done with that. I'm not sure if there's going to be any other features, but the geo-replication I couldn't. Could you clarify what you meant by VPN address? So if you have a corporate VPN, odds are the VPN device you're connecting into has a public-facing IP address. If it does, that's the IP address you want to put in the firewall, right? Otherwise, you want to use your own home IP.
To your point, like what you were mentioning at the beginning, like your home one, if you reboot your router or your machine, you may or may not change that VPN or your IP address. But if you're connected to that corporate VPN, then it's going to be static, hopefully.
Yeah. So right now, if you go to like whatismyip.com, right, it's going to show your public IP address. If you're not using a VPN, you'd want to put this IP address into your firewall. If you're connecting to a corporate VPN, odds are it's going to have a different public IP than what you have, and that would be the IP address you put into your firewall. This way, when you reboot your router and your modem in the middle of the night, you won't have to change it. Young asks, may I ask what are resources to learn the networking aspects of Azure SQL DB? That's a great question. Microsoft Learn has a lot of great information as far as to how Azure networking connects to everything. So the Azure DB firewall and the networking aspects are key parts of the Azure networking as a whole. It's very simple for what I was just showing you by just doing the firewall addressing and things like that. But as far as the other stuff, like you probably want to do the other training because of how in depth it can be, because we didn't even touch on things like network security groups or traffic like load balancing, traffic managers. So I would just do like a look up in like the Microsoft Learn site, Young, and it should point you to some great material.
Great. So I think that's all we have right now. Again, Sam just asked a question, but I'll reiterate. We will post the access to the slides, and then if you've missed some parts of the video, if you got distracted or anything, or you want to share this with other coworkers, we will be uploading this to our YouTube video, and I will put the links to all of that within this meetup, the same link that you joined here. So thanks again, Jim, and I think that's about it.
No problem. It was my absolute pleasure. And thank you guys again for having me.
Thanks. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.